If you love learning about moments in history when God's power showed up in undeniable ways, stick around because today we'll explore miraculous healings, supernatural deliverance, and powerful stories of faith that changed Korea forever. The early 1900s in Korea were a time of upheaval. Korea had been isolated for centuries, calling itself the Hermit Kingdom. But by the late 1800s, Western missionaries started arriving, bringing the message of Christianity with them. At first, the Christian faith grew slowly, but things changed in 1903 with a remarkable event in Wonsan, a port city on Korea's east coast. It was here that what we now call the Korean Revival truly began. The revival spread rapidly, leading to what we now call the Pyongyang Revival in 1907, named after the city of Pyongyang, which at the time was the spiritual heart of Korea. In a country oppressed by Japanese occupation, experiencing poverty and suffering under a feudal class system, Koreans were hungry for hope and healing. The Korean revival arrived at a critical time, with Christians gathering together in fervent prayer meetings, repenting of their sins and asking for God's intervention. And the response? Miracles. In Wonsan, stories began circulating of miracles that set the revival in motion. One such miracle happened during a prayer meeting. A well-known local man who had been paralyzed for years was brought into the gathering. People laid hands on him and began praying earnestly for his healing. Suddenly, he stood up. His muscles were weak, but he was able to walk across the room. News spread like wildfire, and soon people from nearby towns were coming to witness what they believed was a modern-day miracle. This healing didn't happen in isolation. It sparked a wave of faith that led others to pray for healing, and many claimed to receive miraculous physical restoration during these gatherings. Some historical sources document accounts of blind eyes seeing, deaf ears hearing, and chronic diseases disappearing as people repented and prayed. As the revival spread, deliverance became a key part of the movement. In Korean culture, belief in ancestral spirits was widespread, and many families worshipped these spirits in traditional shamanistic practices. But during the revival, as people converted to Christianity, they began renouncing these practices. One notable account from this period is the story of a woman in Pyongyang who was reportedly possessed by a spirit connected to her family's ancestral practices. As she attended one of the revival meetings, the presence of the Spirit of God seemed to confront this spirit within her. Witnesses said she fell to the ground, shaking violently, and then suddenly stilled. When she stood up, she was calm, and from that day on, she experienced peace and no longer felt bound to the ancestral spirits. The deliverance of people from spiritual bondage was so common that many Koreans began burning their families' traditional idols and charms as they embraced Christianity. This deliverance movement played a crucial role in transforming communities, as people abandoned former practices and idols to follow Christ fully. These testimonies stirred hope and brought an even greater sense of awe at God's power. Fast forward to 1907 in Pyongyang, and we see one of the most famous gatherings in Korean revival history. Hundreds of believers were packed into a small church, praying together. During these meetings, a missionary named Dr. R.A. Hardy shared a convicting message about sin and the need for repentance. As he spoke, a profound conviction swept over the crowd. People began confessing their sins out loud, often breaking into tears. But it wasn't just about confessing sins. Supernatural healing was taking place here too. One man who had suffered from severe respiratory problems came forward to confess a deep resentment he'd held against his neighbor. After he confessed and forgave his neighbor, he felt a rush of warmth in his chest and was able to breathe freely for the first time in years. Many saw this as God's way of showing that he could heal not only spiritual wounds, but also physical ones when people turned to him in repentance. The revival eventually touched every corner of Korea. The The Pyongyang revival inspired a surge in Christian conversions, and the number of churches in Korea exploded. What started as a handful of missionaries had grown into a nationwide movement that saw tens of thousands baptized and churches planted across the land. Korea, once a country with almost no Christians, soon became a stronghold of Christianity in East Asia. Even more amazing, the South Korean church didn't lose momentum. The seeds planted during the Korean revival continued to bear fruit throughout the 20th century, laying a foundation for modern-day Korean church, which is one of the most vibrant Christian communities in the world today. For instance, South Korea is now one of the leading nations in sending missionaries across the globe. This legacy began over 100 years ago during that powerful season of revival. The Korean revival reminds us of what can happen when people come together in humility, seeking God earnestly and putting aside their pride. Stories of supernatural healing, deliverance from spiritual oppression, and deep personal transformation are not just historical records, but reminders of the incredible power of faith. If you enjoyed this dive into the Korean revival, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who might be inspired by this history of faith and miracles. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.